The first time I found a bill from a collections agency in my father's mailbox, I thought it was a mistake. My name is Kimberly, and 3 months ago I was grading algebra tests in a climate-controlled classroom, complaining about teenagers who couldn't factor polynomials. Now I'm sitting in a house that smells like disinfectant and defeat, watching my 67-year-old father struggle to remember my name. Kim? Dad's voice drifted from the living room, thin and uncertain. Kim, where's the thing? I set down the stack of medical bills I'd been sorting through and walked to where he sat in his recliner, the same brown, lazy boy he'd owned since I was 12. The stroke had stolen so much from him. His steady electrician's hands, his booming laugh, his ability to fix anything that broke. Now he pointed vaguely at the TV remote, sitting 3 inches from his left elbow. Right here, Dad. I placed it in his palm and watched him stare at it like he'd never seen one before. The news, he mumbled. Want to watch the news. I turned on Channel 7 and kissed the top of his head. His hair had gone completely white in the hospital. 3 months ago, it was still mostly brown. The phone rang as I walked back to the kitchen table, where bills spread across the surface like fallen leaves. Melissa's name flashed on the screen. Hey, sis. Her voice carried that familiar note of controlled chaos, like she was juggling 3 conversations and a latte. How's Dad today? Same. Confused. The physical therapist came this morning, but he couldn't remember the exercises from Tuesday. That's normal, right? The doctor said recovery takes time. I picked up the collections notice again. Mercy General Hospital? Final notice? $2,147 for an MRI that should have been covered by Dad's fund. The fund Melissa had set up. The fund she managed. Melissa, I'm looking at a bill here. Says Dad owes money for his brain scan from last month. I thought you handled that? A pause. Which bill? Mercy General. Almost $3,000. Oh, that. Yeah, there was some insurance mix-up. I'm handling it. It says final notice. Kim, I said I'm handling it. The medical fund has plenty of money. Sometimes these places send bills before they process payments. It's bureaucratic nonsense. I walked to the window and watched Mrs. Sandra next door watering her roses. She'd been bringing us casseroles twice a week since Dad came home from the hospital. Real people helping real problems, not whatever this was. How much is left in the fund? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Why? Because I want to know. Because I quit my job to take care of him, and I need to budget for his medications and therapy and... There's enough, okay? God, Kim, you're so paranoid. I've been managing family finances since you were in college. Trust me. Trust. The word sat heavy in my chest. I trusted her when she said she'd handle the insurance paperwork. I trusted her when she said the fund would cover everything. I trusted her when she promised Dad would get the best care possible. When was the last time you visited him? I asked. I was there 2 weeks ago. For 20 minutes, on your way to somewhere else. Some of us have jobs, Kim. Some of us have responsibilities beyond what? Taking care of our father? The line went quiet except for the sound of her breathing. In the background, I could hear music, voices, the clink of glasses. She was at some restaurant or bar, living her life while I sat in this house watching Dad forget how to use a fork. I'll transfer more money tomorrow, she said finally. The bill will get paid. Stop worrying. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone, then at the collection notice, then at my father in his chair. He'd fallen asleep with the remote in his lap, his mouth slightly open. The news droned on about traffic and weather and normal people living normal lives. The kitchen table held 17 other bills: physical therapy, prescription co-pays, medical equipment rentals, all marked past due or final notice, all supposedly covered by a fund that had plenty of money. I opened my laptop and logged into Dad's email account. The password was still Frank1956, like it had been for years. Maybe I could find some payment confirmations, something to explain the confusion. What I found instead made my blood turn cold. An email thread between Melissa and someone named Crypto Trader M, discussing portfolio diversification and liquid assets. The timestamps went back 2 months, right around the time Dad's medications, started getting delayed because the pharmacy said his account was behind. I printed everything. The emails kept coming. 23 messages between Melissa and crypto trader M, all sent during business hours when she should have been at work. I sat at Dad's kitchen table at 2 a.m, printing page after page while he slept in the next room. Initial transfer complete. 15K moved to wallet address. Will diversify into ETH next week. Confirmed. Another 8K available for immediate liquidation. Market looking good. Perfect timing for Costa Rica trip. Costa Rica trip. I grabbed my phone and opened Instagram. Melissa's account was private, but I still followed her from when we actually talked to each other. I scrolled back 6 weeks. There she was. Sunset beach photos, cocktails with little umbrellas, much-needed vacation with my amazing husband. The timestamp matched exactly with Dad's first missed medication delivery. My hands shook as I took screenshots. The front door creaked. I looked up to see Dad shuffling toward the kitchen in his pajamas, moving like every step hurt. "Can't sleep," he mumbled. "Need water." I closed the laptop and helped him to the sink. His hands trembled as he held the glass. 3 months ago, this man could rewire an entire house. Now he needed help drinking water. "Dad, do you remember Melissa setting up a medical fund for you?" He looked at me with those cloudy eyes. "Melissa? Your daughter, my sister. She has dark hair, lives across town with Carson?" "Oh, yes. Good girl, always good with numbers." Good with numbers. That was one way to put it. "Do you remember signing any papers for her? Bank papers?" Dad's face scrunched up like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Papers? Yes. She said it would help. Make things easier." "What kind of papers?" I can't." His voice cracked. "I can't remember things anymore, Kim. Everything's fuzzy." I hugged him, feeling how thin he'd gotten. "It's okay, Dad. Go back to bed. I'll figure it out." After he shuffled back to his room, I opened the laptop again. More emails, more transfers. The amounts kept getting bigger. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. "Can't sleep. Thinking about Dad. How's he doing?" I stared at the message for a full minute before typing back. "He's fine. Bills are piling up, though. I told you I'm handling it. The pharmacy called today. His heart medication is on hold until the account gets current." "That's impossible. I just transferred money last week." "How much money is left in the fund, Melissa?" The typing indicator appeared and disappeared 3 times before she responded. "Enough. Stop micromanaging me." "I'm not micromanaging. I'm asking a simple question." "It's complicated, okay? Medical expenses are higher than we expected. Insurance isn't covering everything they said they would. I'm having to move money around to maximize our options." "Move money around? Like moving it into cryptocurrency while Dad rationed his pills. Can you send me the account statements?" "Why?" "Because I want to see them." "Kim, you're being paranoid. I've been handling family finances for years. Remember when you couldn't even balance your own checkbook in college?" There it was. The deflection. The reminder that I was the younger sister, the one who supposedly couldn't handle adult responsibilities. Never mind that I'd been teaching teenagers about financial literacy for the past 8 years. "That was 15 years ago, Melissa. Some things don't change. Look, I'm trying to help here. Dad's care is expensive and complicated. If you don't trust me to handle it, maybe you should have thought about that before you quit your job and moved back home." The words hit like a slap. I quit my job because Dad needed round-the-clock care. I moved back home because someone had to make sure he took his medications and didn't fall down the stairs. I sacrificed my career and my savings because family comes first. At least, I thought it did. "Send me the statements, Melissa." "Fine. I'll email them tomorrow." "Tonight. I don't have access to everything from home." "Tomorrow." She hung up. I sat in the dark kitchen, listening to Dad's laboured breathing from the next room and the hum of the refrigerator. The emails glowed on the laptop screen. Transfer after transfer. Thousands of dollars moving from Dad's medical fund into accounts I couldn't trace. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Juliana. We'd been friends since high school, and she was an accountant now. If anyone could make sense of this mess, it was her. It was almost 3 in the morning, but I sent the text anyway. Jules, I need help. Can you look at some financial records? Something's not right with my dad's medical fund. My phone buzzed immediately. Of course, send me whatever you have. I attached the email screenshots and bank statements I'd found in Dad's files. Then I added, my sister's been managing this. The numbers don't make sense. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. Kim! Juliana's voice was sharp, fully awake. This doesn't add up, at all. Juliana arrived at 7 in the morning with coffee and a laptop bag. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Show me everything, she said, settling at Dad's kitchen table. I spread out the printed emails, bank statements, and medical bills. Dad was still asleep, and I wanted to keep it that way. Okay, so your dad's medical fund started with how much? 85,000. His retirement savings plus money from selling Mum's jewellery and some stocks? Juliana's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard. And according to these bank records, the fund should have about 60,000 left, even with medical expenses. Should have? She turned the screen toward me. Look at this. These transfers to MT Holdings, that's not a medical provider. And this one to Coastal Investments for $12,000. When was your dad in Costa Rica? Never. But Melissa was. 6 weeks ago. Juliana's eyebrows shot up. During these transfers, I showed her the Instagram screenshots. Melissa on the beach, cocktails, spa treatments, all time-stamped during the week Dad's pharmacy called about his overdue account. Jesus, Kim. Juliana pulled up another screen. These cryptocurrency wallet addresses in the emails. I can trace some of these transactions. Look. The screen filled with numbers and dates. Money flowing from Dad's medical fund into digital wallets, then converted to Bitcoin and Ethereum. Thousands of dollars disappearing into the blockchain while Dad rationed his heart medication. How much? I asked. Juliana's face went pale. So far, about $37,000, and that's just what I can trace. The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the kitchen floor. The crash woke Dad. Kim, what happened? His voice drifted from the bedroom, confused and scared. Just drop something, Dad. Go back to sleep. I knelt to clean up the mess, my hands shaking. $37,000! More than half of Dad's medical fund, gone. Converted to cryptocurrency while he sat in this house, wondering why his medications kept getting delayed. There's more, Juliana said quietly. These email timestamps. Look when most of the transfers happened. I looked. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, always between 10 and 11 a.m. Melissa works Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I said. She's supposed to be in client meetings. She's been doing this from her office, using work hours to steal from your father. The word hung in the air between us. Steal, not mismanage or redirect or any of the euphemisms Melissa might use. Steal. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. Running late this morning. We'll send those statements after lunch. I showed Juliana the message. She shook her head. She's stalling, probably trying to figure out how to doctor the records. Can you trace more of this? Give me a few hours. But Kim, you need to understand something. This isn't just about the money. If she's been forging documents or lying to financial institutions, this could be criminal fraud. I thought about Dad in his chair, pointing at a TV remote like it was alien technology. About the pharmacy calls and the collection notices and the nights I'd lain awake wondering how we'd pay for his next round of physical therapy. What do I do? Document everything. Don't let her know what you found, and whatever you do, don't confront her alone. After Juliana left, I spent the morning printing and organising. Every email, every bank statement, every medical bill that should have been paid but wasn't. I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 different places. Dad shuffled into the kitchen around noon, looking for lunch. I made him a sandwich and watched him struggle with the simple task of eating. His hands shook, his coordination was shot, but his eyes were clearer today. Kim, he said suddenly, I remember something. What's that, Dad? Melissa came here. A few months ago, had papers for me to sign, said it was for the medical fund. What kind of papers? Bank papers. She said it would make her a co-signer, so she could help pay the bills when I couldn't. Co-signer. which meant she had full access to his accounts. Legal access. Did you read the papers before you signed them? Dad's face crumpled. I tried, but the words, they kept moving around. She said it was just paperwork. Said she was trying to help. I squeezed his hand. You were trying to get better, Dad. You trusted your daughter. That's not wrong. But it was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. My phone rang. Melissa. Hey, I said, keeping my voice steady. About those statements. There's been a computer glitch at the bank. Might take a few more days to get everything sorted out. A computer glitch? Yeah, you know how these things are. Technology, right? But don't worry about the bills. I transferred more money this morning. Everything's covered. I looked at the collection notices spread across the table. The pharmacy's final warning. The physical therapy clinic threatening to suspend Dad's sessions. Melissa, I need to ask you something. Sure. Have you been using Dad's medical fund for other things? Silence. Long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. What kind of question is that? A simple one. Kim, I'm insulted. I've been busting my ass to manage Dad's care while you sit there playing nurse. If you don't appreciate what I'm doing, maybe you should handle the finances yourself. Maybe I should. Fine. Good luck figuring out insurance claims and medical billing and investment strategies. Call me when you realize you're in over your head. She hung up. I stared at the phone, then at the evidence spread across the table. Juliana was right. I couldn't confront Melissa alone, but I could make sure she had nowhere to run when the truth came out. I spent 3 days planning. 3 days of smiling at Dad while rage burned in my chest. 3 days of pretending everything was normal while I built my case. Juliana called Thursday morning with more evidence. I found another wallet. She's moved over $50,000, Kim. And there's something else. What? Some of the transfers came from an account linked to Carson's business. I think she might have used his firm's credentials to legitimize some of these transactions. Carson. Melissa's husband of 12 years. The man who built his reputation on financial integrity and client trust. If Melissa had dragged him into this mess without his knowledge? Are you sure? The routing numbers match his business account. Either he's in on it, or she's been forging his authorization. I thought about Carson. Quiet, methodical Carson, who sent Dad birthday cards and always asked about his physical therapy progress, who'd helped me move Dad's furniture after the stroke and never asked for anything in return. I need to show him, I said. Kim, be careful. If he's involved, he's not. I know him. Melissa's been lying to everyone. That afternoon, I sent a text to Melissa. I'm sorry about yesterday. You're right, I don't understand the financial stuff. Can we have a family meeting? Maybe you and Carson could come over Saturday night and walk me through everything? She responded within minutes. Of course, I knew you'd come around. We'll bring wine and make it fun. Dad would probably enjoy seeing Carson. Fun. She thought stealing from our dying father was going to be fun. I called Clara next. Our cousin had been like an aunt to us growing up, and she'd been checking on Dad regularly since the stroke. Clara, can you come over Saturday evening? Melissa wants to have a family financial meeting, and I think Dad would feel better with you here. Financial meeting? She's been managing Dad's medical fund. I want to make sure everyone understands how the money's being handled. Clara's voice sharpened. Is everything okay, honey? I hope so. Can you come around 7? Of course. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. And maybe ask Sandra if she wants to join us. She's been so helpful with Dad. Sandra, our neighbour, had become Dad's unofficial guardian angel. She'd also become my witness to how often Melissa actually visited, which was almost never. Friday evening, I organised everything into a manila folder. Bank statements showing the original fund balance, medical bills marked past due, screenshots of Melissa's Costa Rica vacation, email printouts of cryptocurrency transactions, Juliana's analysis of the missing money, $53,000. Gone. Dad sat in his recliner, watching me arrange papers on the coffee table. Big meeting tomorrow, I told him. Meeting? Melissa's coming over. With Carson. We're going to talk about your medical expenses. Dad nodded slowly. Melissa's good with money. Yeah, Dad. She's something with money. Saturday arrived grey and drizzly. I spent the morning cleaning the house and making sure Dad was comfortable. He seemed more alert today. like he sensed something important was happening. Clara arrived first, carrying a casserole dish and wearing her concerned aunt expression. "How are you holding up, sweetie?" "I'm managing. Thanks for coming." Sandra knocked 5 minutes later. "I brought cookies," she announced, then lowered her voice. "Everything okay? You sounded stressed on the phone." "We'll find out tonight." At 7 sharp, Melissa's BMW pulled into the driveway. She emerged wearing a designer dress and carrying a bottle of expensive wine. Carson followed, looking tired but smiling. "There's my favourite patient," Melissa announced, breezing into the living room and kissing Dad's forehead. "How are you feeling, Daddy?" Dad smiled at her. "Good. Better." "That's wonderful. And look, I brought your favourite son-in-law." Carson hugged Dad gently. "Hey, Frank, you look good. Physical therapy helping?" "Some days," Dad said. I watched this performance, remembering the collection notices and the delayed medications and the nights Dad had asked why his pills were different colours now. The cheap generic versions we'd switched to when the pharmacy cut off his account. "Wine?" Melissa asked, already opening the bottle. "This is a celebration. Kim finally wants to understand how we're managing Dad's care." She poured glasses for everyone except Dad, who couldn't drink alcohol with his medications. The medications we could barely afford. "So?" Melissa said, settling onto the couch next to Carson. "Where should we start?" I picked up the manila folder from the coffee table. "How about we start with this?" Melissa glanced at the folder, and for just a second, her smile flickered. "What's that?" "Dad's financial records, bank statements, medical bills, investment transactions." I looked directly at Carson. "Some very interesting investment transactions." Carson leaned forward. "Investment transactions? I thought this was just about medical expenses." "Oh, it is," I said. "It's about exactly that." Melissa's wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. "Kim, what are you doing?" "I'm showing everyone how Dad's medical fund has been managed." I opened the folder and pulled out the first bank statement. "This shows the original balance, $85,000. Clara nodded. "That sounds right. Your father worked hard to save that money." "And this," I continued, pulling out more papers, "shows where that money went." I handed the cryptocurrency transaction records to Carson and watched his face change as he read. The colour drained from his cheeks. "Melissa," he said quietly. "What is this?" Melissa set down her wine glass with shaking hands. "I can explain." "Please do," I said. "Explain to Dad why his heart medication was delayed for 2 weeks. Explain to Clara why he's been eating generic cereal instead of the supplements his doctor prescribed. Explain to Sandra why I've been asking her for rides to the pharmacy because I couldn't afford gas." Carson was still reading, his jaw getting tighter with each page. "These are cryptocurrency purchases. $50,000 in cryptocurrency purchases. Carson, let me—" "Using my business routing number," he continued, his voice deadly quiet. "My authorization codes." Melissa's composure finally cracked. "I was trying to grow the money. The medical expenses were so high, and I thought if I could invest some of it—" "While you were in Costa Rica," I said, sliding the Instagram screenshots across the coffee table. Sandra gasped. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Dad looked around the room, confused by the tension, but sensing something was very wrong. "What's happening?" he asked. I knelt beside his chair and took his hand. "We're just talking about money, Dad." But Carson was standing now, the papers scattered at his feet, staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. "You stole from him," he said. "While your father was dying, you stole from him." Melissa shot to her feet, wine sloshing from her glass onto Dad's carpet. "I wasn't stealing. I was investing. There's a difference." "Investing?" Clara's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Honey, your father needed his medication. How is that an investment?" "The medical expenses were bleeding us dry," Melissa said, pacing now. "Insurance wasn't covering half of what they promised. I had to do something to make the money last longer." Carson picked up another page from the floor. "This shows a $15,000 transfer the same day Frank's physical therapy was suspended for non-payment. That was temporary. I was going to pay it back with interest." "With what money?" I asked. "Bitcoin. How's that working out for you?" Melissa's face flushed red. You don't understand cryptocurrency. It's volatile, but the long-term gains... The long-term gains? Sandra stood up, her voice shaking. I've been bringing your father meals because Kim couldn't afford groceries. I've been driving him to appointments because you two couldn't pay for gas. What long-term gains? Dad tried to stand from his chair, his movements slow and unsteady. What's wrong? Why's everyone yelling? I helped him sit back down. It's okay, Dad. We're just discussing finances. But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. Carson was reading another document, his hands trembling. Melissa, this shows you used my business credentials to authorize these transfers. My client's money flows through these same accounts. I had to. The bank wouldn't let me move large amounts without additional authorization. So you forged my signature. I borrowed your credentials. I was going to tell you once the investments paid off. Borrowed? Carson's voice dropped to a whisper. You could have destroyed my business, my reputation, everything I've built. Melissa turned to me, her eyes wild. This is your fault, Kim. You're making this sound worse than it is. I was trying to help. Help who? I pulled out the pharmacy bills. Help Dad when they cut off his heart medication? Help him when they cancelled his physical therapy? Help him when I had to choose between his antidepressants and his blood pressure pills? I didn't know it was that bad. Because you were never here. The words exploded out of me. You visited him twice in 3 months. Twice! While I quit my job and emptied my savings account to keep him alive. Clara moved closer to Dad's chair. Frank, honey, do you understand what's happening? Dad looked up at her with those cloudy eyes. Melissa took my money. The room went silent. Even Melissa stopped pacing. She was trying to help you, Dad, I said gently. But she made some bad choices. Bad choices? Melissa laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. I made strategic financial decisions to preserve Dad's assets. You went to Costa Rica, Sandra said quietly. I saw the pictures on Facebook. Spa treatments and fancy restaurants while your father was eating canned soup because that's all Kim could afford. That trip was planned months in advance. Carson needed the vacation for work stress. Carson stared at her. I paid for that trip, with my own money. What did you spend Dad's money on? Melissa's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The resort upgrades, and the shopping, and the excursions. I thought the investments would cover it by the time we got back. $53,000, I said. That's how much is gone. $53,000 that was supposed to keep Dad alive and comfortable. Dad's voice was small and confused. All of it? I knelt beside his chair again. Not all of it, Dad. There's still some left. Enough for your medications and therapy. But we both knew it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Carson was gathering up the papers, his movements sharp and angry. I need copies of all of this tonight. Carson, please. Melissa reached for him. We can fix this. The cryptocurrency market is recovering. We could get most of it back. Most of it? He stepped away from her touch. Melissa, your father is sitting right there. Look at him. Really look at him. We all turned to Dad. He sat in his recliner, thin and frail, wearing pajamas at 7 p.m. because getting dressed was too exhausting. His hands shook as he reached for his water glass. He needed that money, Carson continued. Not next month or next year. He needed it now, while you were getting massages in Costa Rica. I was stressed. Managing his care is stressful. Managing his care. Clara's voice was ice cold. When? When have you managed his care? Kim's been here every day. Kim's been giving him his medications and helping him shower and making sure he doesn't fall down the stairs. What exactly have you been managing? Melissa collapsed back onto the couch, her designer dress wrinkled, her perfect makeup smeared. I handled the finances. I made the hard decisions about investments and asset allocation. You stole from a stroke victim, Carson said flatly. That's what you did. You stole from your own father while he was dying. He's not dying. The room went quiet again. Dad looked around at all of us, his expression lost and frightened. Am I dying? He asked. I took his hand. No, Dad. You're getting better every day. But Carson was still staring at Melissa, and his next words cut through the room like a knife. While your father suffered here, you built your next life without him. I hope your next flight pays for his funeral. Melissa's face went white. Carson, you don't mean that. Don't I? He was stuffing papers into his briefcase, his movements sharp and deliberate. You used my business credentials to commit fraud? You stole from a sick man? You lied to me for months? I never lied to you. Really? Where did you tell me you were Tuesday mornings? Client meetings, right? Networking events? Melissa's mouth opened, but no words came out. Because according to these timestamps, Carson held up the cryptocurrency transaction records. Tuesday mornings, you were busy converting your father's medical fund into Bitcoin. Clara moved closer to Dad's chair. Frank, honey, maybe you should go rest. This is getting heated. No. Dad's voice was stronger than I'd heard it in weeks. I want to understand. Melissa, did you take my money? Melissa looked at her father, then at the floor. I moved some of it. To better investment vehicles. The medical fund wasn't earning any interest just sitting in savings. How much? Dad asked. It's complicated. How much, Melissa? His voice cracked like a whip. $53,000, I said quietly. Dad stared at Melissa for a long moment. When he spoke again, his words were clear and precise, more lucid than he'd been since the stroke. That money was for my care, for my medications, for Kim, who gave up everything to help me. Dad, I was trying to help. By going to Costa Rica while I rationed my heart pills. The room fell silent. Sandra was crying quietly in the corner. Clara had her hand over her mouth. Carson was staring at his wife like she was a stranger. Frank, Clara said gently, your medication was rationed. The pharmacy kept saying the account was behind, Dad said. Kim would cut my pills in half sometimes, make them last longer. I felt everyone's eyes on me. It was temporary, until the insurance sorted itself out. Insurance that was never going to sort itself out, Carson said, because the money was gone. Melissa stood up abruptly. I'm not going to sit here and be attacked by everyone. I made investment decisions. Some of them didn't work out. That doesn't make me a criminal. Actually, it might, Sandra said quietly. My son Brad works for the county clerk's office. He says financial elder abuse is a felony. Elder abuse? Melissa's voice went shrill. I'm his daughter. You're his daughter who stole $50,000 while he was dying, Clara said. He's not dying. Look at him, I shouted. Really look at him, Melissa. He's lost 40 pounds since the stroke. He can barely remember my name half the time. He needs physical therapy and medications and specialized care. And you spent his money on vacation upgrades. Dad tried to stand again, and this time I helped him. He was shaking, but his eyes were focused. Melissa, he said, I trusted you. Dad, please, I signed those papers because I trusted you, because you're my daughter, and I thought you wanted to help me. I did want to help. By stealing from me? I wasn't stealing, I was investing. Carson slammed his briefcase shut. Stop calling it investing. You gambled with your father's life savings while he was sick and vulnerable. That's not investing, that's theft. Carson, please, we can work this out. The market will recover. The market? He turned on her, his face red with anger. Your father needed his medication today. Not when the market recovers. Today. I'll sell the crypto. I'll liquidate everything. At a 60% loss? According to these records, you bought Bitcoin at 47,000. It's trading at 19,000 now. Sandra gasped. She lost half of it? More than half, Carson said. And that's assuming she can even access the wallets. Some of these exchanges have frozen accounts due to regulatory issues. Melissa sank back onto the couch, her head in her hands. I thought it would work. I thought I could grow the money and surprise everyone. Surprise us? I stared at her. You wanted to surprise us by gambling with Dad's life. It wasn't gambling. Then what was it? Clara asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you took money meant for your father's medical care and spent it on cryptocurrency and vacations. I was trying to make more money for his care. While he went without his medications, Dad said quietly. The simple statement hung in the air. Melissa looked at him, tears streaming down her face. Dad, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. You thought about yourself, he said. You thought about your vacation and your investments and your stress. You didn't think about me. Carson was at the door now, his briefcase in hand. I'm filing for separation tomorrow, and I'm reporting this to the authorities. Carson, wait. No, I won't wait. My business, my reputation, my clients' trust, you've put all of it at risk. For what? So you could play day trader with your dying father's money? He's not dying. He almost did, I said. 3 weeks ago, when his heart medication ran out and I couldn't afford the refill. He had chest pains for 2 days before I could scrape together enough money for a partial prescription. Melissa stared at me. You never told me that. I called you 6 times that day. You were in meetings. I was working. You were trading cryptocurrency. Dad moved slowly toward the door where Carson stood. Thank you, he said, extending a shaky hand. For being honest. For being a good man. Carson shook his hand gently. I'm sorry, Frank. I had no idea what she was doing. I know. You're a good son-in-law. Better than she deserved. Melissa let out a sob. Dad, please don't say that. Dad turned to look at her one last time. You're not welcome in my house anymore, Melissa. Not until you make this right. Dad! Get out. Melissa left that night without another word. Carson followed her out, but not before handing me his business card. Call me tomorrow, he said. We need to figure out how to recover what's left. After they drove away, Clara helped me get Dad settled in his chair while Sandra made tea. The house felt different now, quieter, but also cleaner somehow, like a fever had broken. How are you feeling, Dad? Tired, but my head feels clearer than it has in months. Clara squeezed his shoulder. Sometimes the truth does that. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Carson. I've been up all night going through our joint accounts, he said without preamble. It's worse than we thought. How much worse? She used our home equity line of credit, $28,000. I thought it was for the kitchen renovation. I sat down hard at the kitchen table. She borrowed against your house? Apparently. And there are credit card charges I never saw. Luxury hotels, shopping, restaurants, all while your father was... He trailed off. While my father was eating canned soup and rationing his medication. Kim, I'm filing a police report today. This isn't just family drama anymore. This is criminal fraud. After Carson hung up, I called Juliana. I heard about last night, she said. Clara called me this morning. How's your dad? Better, actually. More alert, like confronting Melissa lifted some kind of fog. And how are you? I looked around the kitchen. The collection notices were still spread across the table, but they felt less threatening now. Angry, relieved, scared about what comes next. What do you mean? If Carson files charges, if this becomes a legal thing, Melissa could go to prison. Kim, she stole over $50,000 from a stroke victim. She forged financial documents. She committed elder abuse. Prison might be exactly where she belongs. The words hit me harder than I expected. Prison. My sister. In prison. I know she deserves it, I said. But she's still my sister. She stopped being your sister the moment she chose her vacation over your father's medication. That afternoon, Sandra knocked on the door carrying a casserole and wearing her concerned neighbour expression. How's Frank today? Good. Eating better. His speech is clearer. And how are you? I let her in, and we sat at the kitchen table. Confused, I guess. Part of me feels vindicated. Part of me feels guilty. Guilty? Honey, why would you feel guilty? Because I destroyed my sister's marriage, her life, everything. Sandra set down her coffee cup and looked at me seriously. Kim, you didn't destroy anything. You exposed what was already destroyed. Melissa did this to herself. But if I hadn't dug into the finances, your father would have died. Maybe not today, maybe not next month, but eventually. When the money ran out completely and he couldn't afford his medications anymore. The truth of that settled over me like a weight. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Sarah, Carson's sister. Can we meet? There are things you need to know about Melissa. I showed Sandra the message. She raised an eyebrow. Carson's sister? What could she know? Only one way to find out. Sarah met me at the coffee shop downtown that evening. She was younger than I expected, with Carson's same serious eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I wasn't sure if I should get involved, but after what Carson told me— "What did he tell you?" "About the fraud. About your father. About how Melissa's been lying to everyone." Sarah pulled out her phone. "But there's something else. Something Carson doesn't know yet." She showed me a series of text messages, Melissa's name at the top. She's been texting me for months, asking about Carson's client list, his business practices, his account access codes. I read the messages. Melissa asking innocent-sounding questions about Carson's work, when he met with clients, how he handled large transfers, whether he ever worked from home. She was gathering information, I said. For months, I thought she was just being a supportive wife, taking interest in his career. But now it looks like she was planning this. Sarah nodded. There's more. She asked me about offshore accounts last month, said she was researching investment options for your father. Offshore accounts? I told her I didn't know anything about that stuff, but she kept pushing. Asked if I knew any lawyers who specialized in international finance. I stared at the messages. This wasn't impulsive gambling or poor investment decisions. This was premeditated theft. Does Carson know about these texts? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first, to see if there was any chance this was all a misunderstanding. I thought about Dad cutting his pills in half, about the nights I'd lain awake, wondering how to pay for his next doctor's appointment, about Melissa's Instagram posts from Costa Rica. There's no misunderstanding, I said. She planned this. All of it. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Carson. Police want to interview you tomorrow about Melissa's access to my business accounts. She showed me the message. It's really happening, isn't it? She's going to be arrested. Probably. Good, Sarah said, her voice hard. She almost destroyed my brother's business, his reputation, everything he worked for. My phone rang. Juliana. Kim, you need to get home. Now. Why? What's wrong? Brad just delivered an envelope to your house from the county clerk's office. It's about your father's will. His will? What about it? Just get home. And Kim, bring a lawyer. I drove home with my heart pounding. Sarah followed in her own car, insisting she wanted to be there for whatever came next. Brad was waiting on the porch with an official-looking envelope. Sorry to bother you so late, Kim. This came through the clerk's office today. Marked urgent. Inside was a copy of Dad's original will from 2018, along with a note from a paralegal named Janet. Ms. Thomas, during routine probate research, we discovered discrepancies in your father's estate documents. Please contact our office immediately. Dad was in his chair, looking more alert than he had in weeks. What's all the commotion? I sat beside him with the papers. Dad, do you remember updating your will recently? My will? No. Haven't touched it since your mother died. Sarah read over my shoulder. This shows your father left everything equally to both daughters, but there's a note here about an amendment filed 6 months ago. What kind of amendment? One that makes Melissa the primary beneficiary and executor of the estate. The room went cold. Dad stared at the papers. I never signed any amendment. The signature looks like yours, Sarah said carefully. Dad took the document with shaking hands. After a moment, he looked up. This isn't my signature. Close, but not mine. See here? He pointed to his name. I always loop the F in Frank. This one's straight. Forgery. On top of everything else, Melissa had forged Dad's will. My phone rang. Juliana. Kim, where are you? Home. Looking at Dad's will. Sarah thinks Melissa's been arrested. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Carson filed the police report this morning. They traced the cryptocurrency transactions and found evidence of wire fraud. She's being held pending arraignment. Sarah grabbed my arm. What's happening? Melissa's been arrested, I told her. Dad closed his eyes. My daughter's going to prison. Dad, no, it's okay. It's what she chose. He opened his eyes and looked at me. What she chose when she decided her vacation was more important than my medication. The front door opened. Clara walked in without knocking, the way she had when we were kids. I heard, she said simply. The whole town's talking about it. What are they saying? that it's about time someone held her accountable. Clara sat down across from Dad. Frank, honey, how are you holding up? Better than I expected. Clearer somehow. Sandra appeared in the doorway. I saw all the cars. Is everything okay? I held up the will documents. Melissa forged Dad's will too. Sandra's mouth fell open. She what? Changed it so she'd inherit everything and control the estate. That girl. Sandra shook her head. I always thought something was off about her. Too slick. Too many excuses. My phone buzzed. A text from Carson. House is going up for sale tomorrow. Divorce papers filed. I'm done. I showed the message to Sarah. She nodded grimly. He's been planning this since last night. Talked to a lawyer first thing this morning. What about the money she stole? The crypto accounts are frozen pending investigation. Whatever's left will go back to your father's medical fund. How much is left? Sarah checked her phone. About $18,000. Not much, but something. Dad struggled to his feet. We all moved to help him, but he waved us off. I want to say something, he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it since the stroke. Kim gave up everything to take care of me. Her job, her savings, her life. She deserves better than a sister who steals and a father who can't remember her name half the time. Dad, don't... Let me finish. He looked around the room at Clara, Sandra, Sarah, and me. Melissa made her choices. Now she has to live with them. But Kim chose family. Real family. The kind that shows up when things get hard. Clara wiped her eyes. Frank, you raised one good daughter. I raised two daughters. One of them forgot what family means. The next morning brought more news. Juliana called while I was making Dad breakfast. The IRS flagged Melissa's accounts. Apparently, she never reported the cryptocurrency gains as income. They're looking at tax evasion charges too. How much trouble is she in? Federal wire fraud, elder abuse, tax evasion, forgery. Kim, she's looking at serious prison time. I hung up and looked at Dad. He was eating scrambled eggs and toast, actually finishing his breakfast for the first time in months. Good news? He asked. Melissa's going to face consequences for what she did. Dad nodded slowly. Good. Actions have consequences. I taught you girls that when you were little. Guess one of you remembered. That afternoon, Carson stopped by with a check. From liquidating what was left in the crypto accounts, he said. $18,400. It's not much, but it's yours. Dad looked at the check, then at me. Kim, this goes toward your expenses, the money you spent taking care of me. Dad, that's your medical fund. My medical fund that my daughter stole while you sacrificed everything. His voice was firm. You earned this money, every penny of it. Carson shook Dad's hand. I'm sorry, Frank. I had no idea what she was doing. You're a good man, Carson. You deserved better than her. After Carson left, I sat with Dad on the porch. The evening was warm, and for the first time in months he seemed peaceful. Do you regret it? He asked. Exposing her? I thought about Melissa in a jail cell, about Carson filing divorce papers, about a family torn apart by greed and lies. No, I said finally. The truth didn't bring my savings back. It didn't erase the nights I cried beside a man begging to die. But when I watched her house go up for sale, I realized something. What's that? Some debts? Life collects them, and karma doesn't send receipts. It sends repo men. Dad smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him since the stroke. My smart daughter, he said, always did have a way with words. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun set. Two people who'd learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart, and who stays.
My name is Margaret Whitfield, and on the night of my birthday, I sat in front of a lemon chiffon cake I bought myself. The candles sputtered, throwing halos across the table. A table at Preston's had been reserved under my name for months. My inbox still held the confirmation and deposit receipt. The room smelled like sugar, and something faintly burned. Hope. Maybe... My phone buzzed. Family Zoom in 10. Big news. I didn't need 10 minutes to guess. For years, I'd funneled part of each paycheck into the family celebration fund, the account we said would keep us together. Lately, it had kept me out. I set down the knife and ran a fingertip through the frosting, drawing a neat line I could control. The screen lit with faces. My mother in pearls, my father still in a tie, Hannah with a glossy brochure lifted like a trophy. "We need to talk about your dinner at Preston's," my father began. "We're reallocating. The money will help Hannah attend an executive summit in Europe. It's a rare opportunity," my mother added. "You can celebrate another time." Hannah smiled as if her reflection were an audience. "You mean the fund I've been paying into?" I said. It wasn't a question. Silence feathered the edges of their squares. "Don't be petty," my mother answered. The way someone hushes a child. I pinched the candle wick between my fingers and felt the sting. "Enjoy your trip," I said, and ended the call. For a long moment, I listened to the building's hum, elevator cables, radiator sigh, the city beyond my windows taking shallow breaths. Then I carried the cake to the sill, inhaled the lemon, and blew out the lights quietly, one by one. I didn't make a wish. I made a promise. Monday remembers. I used to think being overlooked was just a phase, something I'd outgrow. But the truth is, invisibility became the role my family assigned me, and I learned early how to wear it. At school, I brought home perfect report cards tucked into neat folders. Hannah brought home half-finished projects, glitter still drying, and my parents clapped like she'd invented art itself. When I got into law school on scholarship, my mother mentioned it once in passing at a neighborhood barbecue, only to pivot back to Hannah's summer internship in Paris. It was always like that. My accomplishments buried under hers, my voice clipped short so theirs could echo longer. By the time I graduated, I had stopped expecting them to notice. No one came to the ceremony. I stood on the steps of the courthouse afterward, with my diploma pressed against my chest, watching classmates pose with parents holding flowers. The air smelled of hot pavement and roasted nuts from the street cart, and I promised myself I wouldn't cry. That vow tasted like iron on my tongue. Years later, I accepted a junior associate position at my father's firm, thinking maybe working beside him would finally prove my worth. Instead, I became the convenient shadow. He introduced me as one of our younger staff to clients, never his daughter. At staff meetings, he skipped over my raised hand and called on interns instead. The sting dulled into a kind of numbness, but numbness isn't the same as peace. It's simply pain that has learned to sit quietly. I poured myself into the work anyway. Long nights with case files, early mornings drafting briefs, meticulous research no one praised. Hannah would drop by the office sometimes in designer heels, calling herself an executive consultant. I knew she couldn't even spell half the terms I had highlighted on my documents. Still, my parents praised her vision, her networking, her potential. That was the word they used most, potential. For me, there was no such word. Only tasks, duties, obligations. Looking back, I see how each small slight built the scaffolding of something I didn't yet understand. A quiet hunger grew in me, sharper than ambition, steadier than resentment. If they wouldn't see me when I stood in front of them, then I would make sure the day came when they couldn't look anywhere without seeing me. That thought stayed with me, quiet but unshakable, as the years rolled on. The family fund had been my idea. I was the one who suggested it during a Thanksgiving dinner years ago, when the air smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon. I told them a shared account could make birthdays, graduations, and anniversaries easier, a way to guarantee we'd never forget to celebrate each other. They all nodded, and for a moment I thought it meant something. Every month, I moved a portion of my paycheck into that account. It wasn't a fortune, but it was steady, a rhythm of loyalty. I imagined dinners together, weekends away, maybe even a surprise party one day. Instead, I watched the withdrawals stack up. New luggage for Hannah's study program, a flight to Los Angeles for her networking, the down payment on her sleek apartment. My parents called each expense an investment in her future. They never called it mine. I didn't complain, not then. I thought silence meant strength, that if I waited long enough, my turn would come. But each year my birthday slid past like a date no one remembered. The fund quietly drained for Hannah's whims. When I finally asked about it, my father looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "It's all for the family, Margaret. Don't be selfish." Selfish! The word clung to me for months, as though wanting one evening at Preston's made me greedy. As though the years of pouring my energy into their idea of family had no weight. When the cancellation came, when they told me with smiling faces that Hannah's summit mattered more than my dinner, something in me shifted. Not a sharp break, but a clean click, like a lock sliding shut. I realized the fund was never for us. It was a leash, and I had been the one holding it to my own throat. I set the phone down that night and stared at the balance, at the dwindling numbers that carried my name. For the first time, I felt no guilt. The account was empty, but so was my patience. And deep inside, I knew I was done financing anyone else's dreams. What my parents never noticed was that I had been living a double life. By day, I carried files through the narrow halls of my father's firm, head bowed, careful to look like nothing more than another associate. By night, I built something of my own. It started with the inheritance from my grandmother. She had left me a modest sum, the kind of money my parents dismissed as inconsequential. "Don't waste it." "Margaret," my father had warned, as if I were a child holding an ice cream cone. What he didn't realize was that I treated that money like seed. I planted it carefully, investing in small legal tech startups, then reinvesting every return. I studied contracts and financial statements with the same intensity I once reserved for textbooks, slowly weaving a net strong enough to hold something larger. That something became Lexora Strategies. At first, it was just a quiet consultancy, a name on paper that no one connected to me. I met clients in borrowed conference rooms, closed deals over coffee shops, and signed contracts under an LLC shield. Each success folded into the next, and what had begun as an experiment grew into a structure no one could ignore forever. For 5 years I kept it hidden, letting my parents believe I was still the dutiful associate with no ambition. I let Hannah post photos from rooftop bars, her captions dripping with hashtags about power and leadership, while I tracked revenue streams on late-night spreadsheets. She thought influence was followers. I knew influence was leverage. Every sacrifice, every long night, every moment I swallowed pride at family dinners, pretending to be less than I was, it all fed into Lexora. The company wasn't built on rage, though rage was there. It was built on patience, on precision, on the kind of silence that grows sharper with time. By the time I turned 30, Lexora had grown into more than a consultancy. It was an engine, and its next acquisition was already in motion. Carter & Hales LLP, the very firm where my parents reigned as CFO and marketing director. They had no idea. Not yet. But Monday would change that forever. Sunday night carried a brittle chill, the kind that seeps into your bones even when you're indoors. I sat with the cake still untouched, the candles long melted into waxy stubs, when the Zoom call lit up my laptop again. My mother appeared first, perfectly put together as always, pearls catching the glow of her lamp. My father followed, eyes tired but steady, already in his crisp button-down. Then Hannah joined, her grin wide, the glossy brochure in hand like a prize ribbon. "We have exciting news," my mother said, voice lilting, as though I hadn't already been told. "Hannah's been invited to an executive summit in Europe. It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance." I leaned closer to the camera, letting their faces sharpen into focus. "So the dinner I booked months ago, the one I paid for, that's gone." My father cleared his throat. "We had to reallocate. Opportunities like this don't wait. You can celebrate another time." The words fell like cold stones, but I kept my expression even. Hannah leaned in, smirking. "Don't sulk, Margaret. This summit could put me on track to become a CEO someday." My lips curved into a smile so calm it startled even me. "Then I hope the trip is everything you dream it will be." They blinked, confused by my lack of protest. My father shifted in his chair. My mother's smile faltered, but I didn't give them the satisfaction of anger. I clicked end meeting and sat in the sudden silence. The apartment seemed to expand around me, the city lights bleeding through the windows. I carried the cake into my study, past the rows of monitors already glowing with Lexora's dashboards. One screen displayed the finalized vote count, unanimous approval for the acquisition. Another showed the calendar reminder, Monday, 9 hours. I set the cake beside the keyboard and slipped off my heels, feeling the hardwood cool against my feet. The fund was gone. The dinner was gone. But none of it mattered now. Tomorrow belonged to me. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I simply whispered into the quiet, "Enjoy your flight, Hannah." Monday remembers. Monday morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of sky that seemed to dare you to falter. I chose my clothes with precision, a black Chanel dress, clean lines and quiet strength, heels that marked each step with authority. No muted grays or faded blues today. Today, every detail had a purpose. When I walked into the lobby of Carter & Hales, the receptionist glanced up, offering the same distracted nod she'd given me for years. She had no idea the name on the deed she was working under had changed hands. Security barely looked at me as I crossed the marble floor. Invisibility, once a curse, was now my shield. On the 15th floor, my old cubicle sat exactly as I'd left it, cramped, cluttered with sticky notes, a framed certificate half hidden beneath a fake plant. My parents had never stepped foot there. They never saw the hours I poured into the work, the quiet diligence they mocked as lack of ambition. Margaret. Hannah's voice sliced the air. She strutted past in a white suit that tried too hard, phone in one hand, latte in the other. She slowed when she saw me. "You're here early?" "Finishing up grunt work." I smiled faintly. "Something like that." She leaned closer, her perfume cloying, her grin smug. "You heard about my summit, right? Europe. They don't offer that to just anyone. Dad says it's the perfect stepping stone." She lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. "Word is a big firm's circling us. Maybe a takeover. Scary stuff. Don't worry, though. You'll be fine. I'll fill you in on how real business works." She winked and sauntered off, her heels clicking down the hall. I checked my watch. 8:30. The board meeting began in 30 minutes. I wasn't headed there, not to sit along the walls like an afterthought. My destination was the private suite I designed in secret, 3 floors above, a room only one person had access to. The clock was ticking. By 9, every truth I'd swallowed for years would walk into daylight. And for the first time, they would have no choice but to look directly at me. The boardroom was already filling when I arrived in the private suite above it, a room paneled with glass that allowed me to see everything without being seen. Below, directors took their seats, their voices hushed, their expressions uneasy. My father stood at the head of the table, papers arranged neatly before him like weapons. My mother hovered near Hannah, fussing with her hair, whispering something that made them both laugh. At precisely 9, the doors opened. A woman in a tailored navy jacket stepped inside, flanked by 2 attorneys. "Good morning," she began, voice calm but firm. "My name is Rachel Adler, representing Lexora Strategies. Effective immediately, Carter & Hales is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Lexora." Gasps broke the air. My father's face darkened. "This is outrageous," he barked. "You can't just walk in here." Rachel remained composed. "The acquisition has been finalized with full board approval. Transition documents are in front of you." Attorneys moved swiftly, placing thick folders before each director. "What about my summit?" Hannah blurted, her voice shrill. "I was chosen for the elite track. I leave tomorrow." "The program has been discontinued," Rachel replied evenly. "It was never more than a screening initiative, and your results disqualified you." My mother's hand flew to her throat. My father flipped through the papers, his voice rising. "Hostile takeover, Illegal? How could this happen under our noses? That was my moment. I pressed a hidden panel, and with a soft click, the wall in front of me slid open. I descended the private staircase, heels striking each step like a drumbeat. Every head turned. My father's mouth fell open. My mother blinked rapidly, as if she could erase me with enough denial. Hannah's smirk collapsed into something pale and brittle. I believe I can answer that, I said, stepping into the light. Lexora is mine. Built in silence while you looked past me, while you poured everything into Hannah. You're just an associate, Hannah stammered. I corrected, letting the word hang. Now I'm the one signing your termination. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. For the first time, their eyes were on me, and there was nowhere else for them to look. They summoned me to my new office an hour later, though in truth, they were the ones entering foreign ground. The space no longer resembled my father's kingdom of leather chairs and oil paintings. I had stripped it clean, replaced the excess with glass, steel, and light. Screens glowed softly behind me, displaying numbers that no longer belonged to him. My parents walked in together, hesitant for once. My father's tie was crooked, his jaw set in a way that suggested he was bracing for impact. My mother's mascara had smudged, the careful facade slipping. Hannah trailed behind, her phone clutched but useless now. How could you do this to us? My mother whispered, as though betrayal had only one direction. I motioned to the chairs across from me. Sit. The same word he had used on me countless times in this very room. They obeyed. I opened a file and pressed a button. My father's voice filled the space, recorded from a meeting 2 years ago. Keep Margaret where she is. She doesn't have leadership instincts. Another click, my mother's voice. Don't include her in the track. Give it to Hannah's friend. Each clip landed like a stone. My father leaned forward. How did you even get these? I let a small smile touch my lips. Ever wonder why I always volunteered for the cubicle near the server room? Silence. My mother's face drained of color. You spent years funneling money into Hannah's lifestyle, creating fake roles for her friends, draining company resources, I continued. While you sabotaged me, I built Lexora into something strong enough to buy you out. And now, the board has approved generous severance packages. You'll clear your offices within the hour. And Hannah? My father asked, though his voice had lost its fight. She'll find real work, I said. Starting at the bottom, where I once was. Hannah's chair scraped loudly as she stood. You've ruined everything. I met her glare with calm. No. I've rebuilt what you never valued. Security appeared at the door, waiting for my signal. For the first time, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Not triumph. Not gloating. Just clarity. They had chosen to forget me. I had chosen to remember everything. When the door closed behind them, the office seemed to exhale. The silence was different now, no longer the kind that crushed me into corners, but the kind that widened into space I finally owned. I stood at the window, watching the city spread beneath me, its glass towers catching the morning light. New York had always felt indifferent, but today it reflected something back. Recognition. I thought of every night I'd worked in secret, every time I swallowed my voice at the dinner table, every birthday passed over. Those moments had carved me into someone they didn't expect, someone they couldn't see until it was too late. They believed silence meant weakness. They never understood silence can also mean preparation. My phone buzzed on the desk, messages from distant cousins, old classmates, people suddenly eager to be close to me. But I ignored them. The only words that mattered were the ones I told myself. I'm no longer invisible. I didn't take pleasure in seeing my parents undone. The satisfaction was simpler, steadier. For once, the scales had balanced. They had chosen who deserved love, who deserved resources, who deserved to be celebrated. Today, I chose myself. I pressed a hand against the cool glass, the city humming below. This wasn't revenge for the sake of pain. It was reclamation for every overlooked effort, every stolen opportunity, every whispered dismissal. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. Quiet builds. Quiet waits. And when the moment comes, quiet rises. I blew out the memory of those 30 candles once more in my mind. And this time, I let myself make a wish. Because Monday had remembered, and so had I. My name is Dorothy Caldwell, and tonight my daughter is laughing at me with a microphone in her hand. Crystal light drips from the chandeliers of a downtown Chicago ballroom, and the band has softened to a hush so everyone can hear the joke. Lauren's best friend warms the crowd first, calling me ambitious for my age. Then Lauren leans into the mic like a comic at a late show. She thanks the venue, thanks the caterer, then thanks me for funding my own midlife experiment. Laughter rises like steam. Someone across the room actually claps. I hold my champagne glass with both hands so it doesn't rattle. I paid for the flowers on these tables, for the string quartet playing the standards she loves, for the open bar that is making strangers bold. I also promised Lauren I wouldn't talk about my work tonight. No business talk, no projects, just smiles and small talk. So I smile. I nod when a cousin mouths, "It's a joke." I swallow the rest of my drink and feel the bubbles fizz like static under my tongue. On the far side of the room, the groom's boss, Charles Whitmore, watches me over the rim of his glass. We met earlier, barely. He thought I helped local shops stay organized. It was easier to let him keep the picture. The servers clear plates. The air smells like butter and peonies. Lauren raises her glass one more time and says, "Here's to moms who dream, even when the world has moved on." The room laughs on cue. I find the floor with my eyes, because the floor is steady. I didn't come here to be brave. I came to keep my promise. But promises bend when truth starts to breathe tonight, hard. 2 years before that night, I was sitting in a one-bedroom apartment with cardboard boxes stacked against the wall, and silence thick enough to hear my own pulse. The divorce papers had been signed, the house sold, and after 30 years at the same company, I was told my position was no longer needed. It sounded polite, but I knew what it meant. They wanted younger, cheaper hands. At 59, I was disposable. Lauren didn't hide her disappointment when I told her, "Mom, maybe it's time to slow down. You could take a class, volunteer, maybe travel a little." She suggested over brunch one Sunday, her eyes flicking between me and the phone in her lap. To her, slowing down was dignified. To me, it felt like erasing myself while I was still breathing. That afternoon, I pulled out every notebook I had saved over the years, lists, schedules, strategies from running other people's offices. I stared at the neat columns of handwriting and realized I had been training for something without knowing it. If I could keep other companies upright through chaos, why not my own? The first client came through a neighbor's referral. A struggling logistics firm needed help trimming waste and reorganizing workflow. I spent nights at my dining table drawing maps of their processes, drinking coffee until my fingers shook. 3 months later, their profits jumped. The owner mailed me a handwritten note that said, "You saved us." I read it 3 times, then pinned it to the wall. Word spread slowly, then faster. By the time Lauren announced her engagement, I was signing contracts that carried more zeros than my old salary ever had. But I kept the company name modest, Caldwell Partners. Clean, anonymous, no need to connect it to me. It was easier that way, especially with a daughter who rolled her eyes whenever I mentioned my clients. At Thanksgiving, when I started to explain a recent acquisition, Lauren waved me off. "Mom, not at the table. Ethan doesn't need to hear about your experiments." The word stung. Experiments? As though I were a child playing with blocks. I swallowed my retort, passed the gravy, and told myself that one day she might understand. But privately, I was beginning to understand something too. The people closest to me weren't simply dismissive. They were embarrassed. And embarrassment, I would soon learn, is louder than love. The more my work grew, the more determined my family seemed to shrink it. At Sunday dinners, my brother Harold loved to remind me I was reinventing the wheel. He'd lean back in his chair, glass of wine in hand, and say, "Dot, you're chasing something you should have done 30 years ago. Why not relax and enjoy the rest of your life?" He made it sound like advice, but it always landed like judgment. Lauren wasn't cruel in the beginning, just skeptical. She'd tilt her head, half smiling, whenever I shared good news. "That's great, Mom, but you know businesses fail all the time. Don't set yourself up to be disappointed." When I tried to explain a strategy I developed, she cut me off with, "Let's not bore Ethan with shop talk." I learned to change the subject, folding my victories into silence. Even Ethan, the young man she was about to marry, played the part of the patient listener. He'd pat my hand like I was a grandmother showing off crochet. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Caldwell. Keeps you busy, huh?" I would excuse myself to refill my glass, just so I didn't have to answer. It wasn't just words. There were looks, those quick glances between relatives when I spoke with too much enthusiasm, the way conversation would skip ahead, as though I hadn't spoken at all. Once, at a baby shower for my niece, I overheard someone whisper, "Dorothy's still pretending she's a CEO." The laughter that followed burned hotter than the candle wax dripping onto the cake. What none of them knew was that every slight became fuel. Each eye roll, each chuckle behind my back, hardened my resolve. I stayed up late reading reports, learning sectors I had no business mastering, and making moves I told no one about. By the time Lauren began planning her wedding, I had secured ownership in 2 mid-size firms and was negotiating for a third. But to my family, I was still the woman with a hobby. I smiled through their dismissals, but in quiet moments, I kept one truth close. Someday, the difference between their version of me and the reality would be too big to hide. When Lauren announced her wedding date, the whole family erupted in excitement. She chose a ballroom in the heart of Chicago, the kind of venue with vaulted ceilings and chandeliers that glowed like 100 suns. She wanted everything perfect, and I wanted to give her that. I offered to contribute, quietly covering invoices for flowers, musicians, and the photographer. Lauren never asked where the money came from. She assumed it was leftovers from the divorce settlement, and I didn't correct her. One evening, as we sorted through seating charts spread across her kitchen table, she set down her pen and looked at me with a seriousness that made me pause. "Mom, please, one thing. Don't bring up your business to Ethan's colleagues. They won't get it. Just say you're between jobs, or retired, or anything else. I don't want them to think you're trying too hard." The words stung, but I nodded. I told myself it wasn't worth a fight, that her big day mattered more than my pride. Still, I carried her request home like a stone in my chest. On the morning of the wedding, I stood before the mirror in a pale blue dress I'd chosen carefully. Elegant, but not loud. Nothing that might draw attention. I wanted to be present without taking space. The hotel room smelled of roses and hairspray, the air buzzing with the laughter of bridesmaids drifting through the door. Lauren swept in wearing her gown, satin pooling at her feet like liquid ivory. She looked radiant, the very picture of everything I wanted for her. When our eyes met in the mirror, she smiled briefly before turning back to her maid of honor. There was love in that smile, but also distance, as though I were an accessory to the day rather than its foundation. I clutched my purse where the checkbook still rested, evidence of all I had done to make this moment shine. I thought of the companies I had signed contracts with, the deals still pending, the empire she believed was imaginary, and I promised myself, again, that tonight I would remain silent, even if silence felt like surrender. But silence has edges, and I could already feel them pressing in. The ballroom glowed like a dream, round tables draped in ivory cloth, crystal flutes catching the candlelight, and a band tucked into the corner coaxing out old jazz standards. Guests mingled in sequined dresses and sharp tuxedos, balancing plates of hors d'oeuvres while waiters wove through with trays of champagne. I tried to absorb it all, reminding myself that despite everything, this was still my daughter's wedding. At first, everything unfolded smoothly. The ceremony had been beautiful, almost cinematic, and I'd cried when Lauren walked down the aisle. Dinner was served with chatter bouncing between tables, laughter rising over the music. I stayed polite, chatting with distant relatives and keeping my answers vague when Ethan's colleagues asked about me. "I keep busy," I said with a smile, deflecting like a seasoned politician. Then the speeches began. The maid of honor started off sweet, recalling high school stories and silly adventures. But soon her tone shifted. She grinned at the crowd, gesturing toward me. And of course, we can't forget Dorothy, our bride's mom, who's been on quite the adventure. Some people call it a midlife crisis, but hey, it keeps her busy. Laughter rippled across the room. My smile stayed glued in place, though my stomach hollowed. I gripped the stem of my glass, forcing myself not to flinch. When Lauren stood, I prayed she might soften it, add warmth. Instead, she doubled down. "Thanks, Amy. Yes, Mom's been dreaming big lately, building her empire." She even lifted her fingers in mock quotation marks. We tell her to be realistic, but she insists on chasing goals that, well, might have an expiration date. The laughter this time was louder, sharper. I could hear Ethan's co-workers nearly choking on their drinks. Even the servers smirked as they cleared plates. Heat rushed to my cheeks. My own daughter, standing before 200 guests, had just reduced my life's work to a punchline. I sat there, smiling so hard my face ached, but inside something cracked. The night wasn't supposed to be about me, and yet every laugh in that ballroom felt like a nail hammered straight into my chest. After the speeches, I wanted nothing more than to slip into the shadows, maybe hide in the powder room until it was safe to leave. But before I could escape, Ethan appeared at my side, his tie loosened, glass in hand, cheeks flushed from drink and victory. He leaned in close, his voice pitched in that condescending whisper men use when they think they're being kind. "Dorothy, you were such a good sport out there," he said, patting my arm. I know Lauren's jokes might have stung, but hey, everyone knows it's just for fun. Don't take it too seriously. We all appreciate your consulting thing. It keeps you active. My jaw clenched. Consulting thing? He said it as though I dabbled in crossword puzzles between daytime TV shows. I forced a smile. "My work means a great deal to me, Ethan." "Of course it does," he said quickly, like a teacher humoring a stubborn student. "But you don't want to put too much pressure on yourself. At your stage, it's more about staying engaged, right? Not building something big." I stared at him, my pulse hammering in my ears. He had no idea. He thought I shuffled papers for mom and pop shops, when in reality I had just finalized an acquisition that would change the trajectory of his entire company. The urge to correct him rose hot in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Tonight was supposed to be Lauren's moment, not mine. So I excused myself, murmured something about needing fresh air, and walked toward the balcony. The night air was cool, sharp against my burning skin. I gripped the railing and forced myself to breathe, to steady the tremor in my hands. Inside, laughter swelled again as the music picked up, the celebration resuming as though nothing had happened. I had come here determined to protect my daughter's day, but Ethan's words lodged deep. He wasn't mocking me outright. He was dismissing me with a smile, the way everyone else had. And somehow, that dismissal hurt worse than open ridicule. Because it wasn't just ignorance. It was belief, unshakable belief that I was small. I returned inside after a few minutes, my smile rebuilt like armor. I told myself I'd endure the rest of the evening, cut the cake, hug the bride, and vanish before midnight. But fate had other plans. As I wove through the crowd, a tall man stepped into my path. His handshake was firm, his voice polished. "Mrs. Caldwell, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Charles Whitmore, Helios Systems." The name made my pulse skip. Helios Systems, the very company I had signed the papers to acquire 3 months earlier. It's Miss Caldwell, I corrected softly. Yes, I know who you are. His brow arched, intrigued. Your daughter mentioned you consult for small businesses. That's admirable work. What sort of projects do you usually handle? I could have brushed him off, given the rehearsed answer. But after the speeches, after Ethan's patronizing pat, I found myself unwilling to shrink anymore. I focus on acquisitions and operational restructuring, I said evenly. Mostly mid-size firms in the tech and logistics sector. Companies like Helios, for instance. Charles chuckled politely, then faltered when he saw I wasn't joking. His glass wobbled in his hand. Excuse me, what did you just say? I recently completed the acquisition of Helios Systems, I replied. It closed in July. The color drained from his face. He blinked once, twice, as if searching for the punchline. You're Caldwell Partners. His voice dropped lower. You're the Dorothy Caldwell. I inclined my head. Yes. For a heartbeat. Silence hung between us, the music and chatter of the ballroom fading to nothing. Then he exhaled sharply, nearly spilling his drink. My God. His eyes darted around the room, to Ethan laughing with his colleagues, to Lauren basking in attention. When his gaze returned to me, it carried a new weight, respect mixed with disbelief. They've been mocking you all night, he whispered. And half this room draws paychecks from companies you own. His words sank in like a stone through water. And suddenly, I knew the night wasn't finished with me yet. Charles didn't move away. He looked at me as if I were a puzzle that had just solved itself in front of him. Then, with a slow breath, he set his glass down and straightened. This isn't right, he murmured. People deserve to know. Mr. Whitmore, please, I whispered, my hand tightening on his sleeve. This is my daughter's wedding. I won't steal her day. But he shook his head, the muscles in his jaw flexing. No, Dorothy. They stole it from you when they mocked you to your face. And besides, Ethan doesn't even realize who you are. Do you know what it means that his wife's mother owns the very company he works for? Before I could stop him, Charles stepped forward. His voice carried easily when he reached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption. I need to make an announcement. The band stopped mid-note. Conversation died. 200 heads turned. My stomach twisted as every eye swung toward the man holding the mic. We've all been under a grave misunderstanding, Charles continued. Tonight, many of you laughed along when Mrs. Caldwell was described as chasing fantasies. What you didn't know is that she is, in fact, the founder of Caldwell Partners, one of the most successful acquisition firms in our sector. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A fork clattered to the floor. I felt the air shift like a current sweeping the room. In the past 2 years, Charles pressed on, she has acquired 4 major companies, including Helios Systems, where I serve as chief executive. Which means, Ethan, he gestured toward the groom, whose face had gone pale. Your mother-in-law is, quite literally, your boss's boss. The silence that followed was unbearable. I wanted the floor to split open and swallow me. Yet there I stood, exposed under the chandelier's glare. My daughter's wide eyes locked on mine. Mom, Lauren whispered, her voice cracking. Is this true? I rose slowly, my knees steady despite the storm inside. Charles offered me the microphone. I took it, my hands trembling just enough to betray the weight of the moment. And for the first time that night, I chose not to stay silent. The microphone felt heavier than it should have, but my voice came out clear. Yes, it's true, I said, meeting Lauren's eyes. I am the founder of Caldwell Partners. For the last 2 years, I've been building a business I never thought possible. I didn't tell you because you asked me not to. You were embarrassed by me, and I respected your wishes. But make no mistake, what you laughed at tonight was not a fantasy. It was my life's work. The room was silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. Lauren's face flushed crimson. Ethan's jaw hung slack, and even Harold sat stiff in his chair, unable to form a joke. I handed the microphone back to Charles and returned to my seat. Conversation started again, hushed, nervous, as people recalibrated their memories of me. Those who had chuckled now avoided my gaze. Others approached awkwardly, eager to apologize, to attach themselves to the truth of who I was. Lauren came to me near the end of the night, her mascara smudged, her voice raw. "Mom, I didn't know. I'm so sorry." Her hand trembled in mine, but I didn't let her off easily. It wasn't about not knowing, I told her gently. It was about not believing I could be more than the version you had in your head. When I left the ballroom, the night air was cool against my face. For the first time in years, I felt no need to explain myself, no urge to defend my choices. The truth had spoken for me, and as I walked toward the waiting car, one thought carried me forward. You are never too old to begin again, and never too small to be underestimated. My name is Hazel Chapman, and the last thing my sister said to me was, "Stay here. I'll get hot chocolate." The bench was metal and cold, the kind that prints a line across the back of your legs. Overhead, the departures board flickered, and a voice announced delays to places I'd never see. Rachel lifted 2 fingers in a wave and drifted into the concourse. Eyeliner perfect, like this was nothing. 10 minutes stretched into a shape I didn't recognize. I kept my backpack under one arm and my phone, texting once, then twice. No bubbles appeared. A train slid through the platform and left its breath behind, a fog that made everything look away. I studied the door she'd vanished through, staring hard enough to pull her back. When the message came, it landed without punctuation. Find your own way home. Practice. Practice. The word caught under my ribs. Around me, couples argued in whispers. A toddler laughed at a luggage carousel that wasn't meant to be entertainment, and a custodian leaned the mop against a wall and watched me not cry. I pulled my hood tight, loosened it, tightened it again. Stupid adjustments that made me feel steady when nothing was. I thought about asking for help. I pictured the security desk, the questions, the ride back to a house where I'd be the joke that never got old. I swallowed that future and stood instead, bench screeching in protest. The terminal's lights shifted toward a bruised evening. I counted the bills in my pocket, counted the doors, counted breath. If Rachel wanted me to learn something, I did. People leave. Trains don't wait. And if I wanted to get home, I'd have to choose where home would be. The clock above the concourse hummed louder than the trains. Every time the second hand jerked forward, I told myself Rachel was about to appear, a paper cup in her hand, her grin sharp as ever. But the space where she should have been stayed empty. I kept staring at that gap until my eyes burned. I dialed her again, straight to voicemail. The sound of her cheerful recording made my stomach twist. I hung up before the beep, because leaving a message felt like begging. I wasn't going to beg. Not for her. Not after that text. A woman in a red scarf sat 2 seats down, sipping from a thermos. She smiled faintly. The kind of polite recognition you give a stray dog you're not sure you should pet. I smiled back, too quick, like I had a plan. My fingers dug into the zipper of my hoodie pocket, checking again for the 8 crumpled dollars I already knew were there. The overhead lights buzzed brighter as the sky outside collapsed into blue-black. A janitor passed, pushing a cart that squeaked like it hated him. His eyes skimmed me, then away. For everyone else, I was background, a kid with a backpack. Nothing urgent, nothing lost. I pulled out the granola bar, snapped it in half, and chewed slowly as if neat bites could hold me together. Each crunch echoed against the tiled walls, louder than it should have been. I thought about calling my mother, but her voicemail had been full for weeks. My father wasn't even worth considering. A vending machine glowed across the concourse, bright as temptation. Chips, candy bars, soda, each packet a tiny square of safety ore. I walked over, fed in $1, and the machine spat out a bottle of water. When I returned to my seat, I placed the bottle carefully in my lap, like proof I was still making decisions. But every time I glanced at the phone, Rachel's last message stared back, colder than the November air that seeped through the station doors. Find your own way home. Practice. I wanted to smash the phone on the floor, shatter it until the words disappeared. Instead, I tucked it face down under my thigh, holding it there like it might bolt if I let go. I told myself she'd come back eventually. But even then, some small part of me already knew the truth. She was gone, and this bench was no longer just a stopover. It was the first step into a life I hadn't chosen. The station thinned out as the evening wore on. Families disappeared into cars, travelers dragged their rolling bags toward waiting cabs, and the janitor's cart squealed down the far hall. I stayed planted on that bench, arms folded tight across my chest, trying not to look like a kid abandoned. The hunger came back in waves. The granola bar had barely taken the edge off, and the vending machine crackers in their shiny plastic bag mocked me from across the concourse. I counted coins in my palm, every clink a reminder that $8 wasn't nearly enough for survival. When the loudspeaker announced the last arrival for the night, the sound made my chest tighten. I pictured the building going dark, doors locked, me pressed against the cold glass with nowhere to go. Panic scratched the back of my throat, but I swallowed it down hard. If Rachel wanted me to prove I was tough, I'd do it. I'd make it through this night, even if my insides felt like they were unraveling. I forced myself to stand and walk a loop through the concourse. The newsstand was shuttered. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air, and a poster with the faces of missing kids stared back at me from the wall. My reflection in the glass looked older, harsher, the kind of face people glance at and then quickly look away. At the far end of the station, near the restrooms, a security guard asked if someone was coming for me. His voice was casual, but his eyes lingered too long. Yeah, I lied, any minute. He nodded and moved on, but his footsteps sounded heavier than they should have. By midnight, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the sound drilling into my skull. I pulled my hoodie tight, hugged my backpack to my chest, and stretched out on the bench. The plastic dug into my cheek, unforgiving and cold. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that never came, jerking awake at every echo of footsteps. At some point, I stopped expecting Rachel to walk back through those doors. The thought settled heavy in my chest, leaving behind something sharper than fear. This wasn't practice. This was real. And if I wanted to survive, I'd have to start making choices she never thought I could make. Morning light through the tall windows made the station look even emptier, every shadow stretching longer than it should. My eyes felt swollen, my body heavy from a night of half-sleep and jolts awake. When I caught my reflection in the restroom mirror, the girl staring back at me looked nothing like Hazel Chapman anymore. Her hair was greasy, her lips dry, and her eyes carried a kind of hollow I didn't know could form in just one night. I wandered outside, clutching my backpack straps until my knuckles ached. The streets hummed with commuters, their coffee cups steaming, their briefcases clicking against their legs. Nobody saw me. Nobody knew I'd been left behind. I sat on the curb until hunger gnawed sharp enough to make me dizzy. That's when she appeared. An older woman with a purple scarf knotted around her neck. Gray hair pulled back neat, and kind eyes that didn't dart away. She paused, studied me, then lowered herself to the curb beside me. You okay, honey? The word yes hovered on my tongue, but what came out was different. I lost my family. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her tote and handed me a wrapped sandwich. Eat! Then we'll talk. My hands shook as I tore it open, the smell alone making my stomach twist. Between bites, she told me her name was Margaret Hale and that she knew a church a few towns over where I could sleep safely. No police, just volunteers, she said. When she asked my name, I didn't hesitate. Emma Grant, I lied. The sound of it steadied me, like I could be someone untouchable. Margaret accepted it without question and pressed a $20 bill into my palm. Bus to Maple Street. Tell the driver you need the shelter. That night, I lay on a thin mattress in the shelter's dormitory, my backpack under my head, the name Emma echoing in my mind. The fluorescent lights hummed just like the station, but the air smelled of soup and soap instead of cold metal. For the first time since Rachel walked away, I let my eyes close without staring at a door. Hazel was gone. Emma was here now. The shelter became a stopgap, not an ending. Within months, I was placed with a foster family who kept rules like clockwork. Dinner at 6, curfew at 9, grades above average, or else. They weren't warm, but they weren't cruel. And for me, that was enough. I learned quickly that silence kept me safe. The less I explained, the fewer questions came about where I was from or why I had no parents at conferences. At school, a flyer for junior ROTC caught my eye. The promise of uniforms, drills, and discipline sounded less like restriction and more like order. I joined, and for the first time, the name Emma Grant felt like it belonged on something official. In uniform, everyone looked the same. Nobody could tell who had a family waiting at home and who didn't. Sergeant Daniels, the instructor, had a voice that sliced through noise like steel. He didn't ask about backgrounds. He demanded precision, chin up, arms straight, steps even. When he barked good work, Grant, after a flawless drill, it echoed through me louder than any applause I'd ever known. The program gave me something I hadn't realized I craved. Control. I polished my shoes until they mirrored the fluorescent lights. I folded my bed with hospital corners, even when no one checked. The sharper my routine, the less space there was for the chaos Rachel had left behind. By the time I was 17, Daniels pulled me aside. Ever think about the service? His gaze didn't waver. You've got the discipline. Kids like you thrive there. That night, I sat under the dim lamp in my foster room with a Marine Corps brochure spread across my knees. Mud-caked recruits, obstacle courses, mottos like honor, courage, commitment. Each word lit a fuse inside me. I didn't want easy. I wanted the hardest. On my 18th birthday, I signed enlistment papers with hands steady as stone. As the recruiter shook my hand, he said, "Welcome to the Corps." For the first time since that bench at the train station, I felt like I wasn't waiting for anyone else to come back. I was moving forward on my own terms. The heat in Afghanistan wasn't like anything I'd known. It pressed on my skin, thick and relentless, the kind of heat that made every breath feel like swallowing fire. My rifle weighed heavy against my shoulder, and the 40 pounds of gear on my back dug into every muscle. But I kept moving in step with the squad. Out there, hesitation wasn't an option. Our first firefight came in a dried-out riverbed. One moment the air was still. The next it cracked with gunfire that ricocheted off stone. I dropped behind a rock, heart thudding, ears ringing, body shaking, but training overruled panic. I squeezed the trigger, watched dust spray from the ridge where the fire came. My squad leader barked orders, and we pushed forward, each of us trusting the other to cover blind spots. That day, Private Dawson, just 19, took a bullet through the vest. I helped drag him to the medevac, his blood soaking my gloves, his breath shallow until it wasn't there at all. When the helicopter lifted, he was already gone. I told myself I couldn't cry. Not then. Not when the fight wasn't over. Loss followed us like a shadow. Corporal Jameson went down weeks later in an IED blast. One second he was signaling us through a doorway. The next there was fire, dust, screaming. I pulled another Marine out of the debris, ribs aching, ears ringing. That night, when silence finally came, the absence of his voice felt louder than the explosion. War stripped everything to its bones. Meals came in pouches, sleep in fragments, laughter in bursts that sounded more like survival than joy. Some nights, lying under a sky littered with stars, I felt both smaller than I'd ever been and more certain than ever. I wasn't the girl abandoned at a train station anymore. I was a Marine, forged in fire and loss. But every bullet, every name carved into memory deepened something inside me, a vow that I'd never again let someone decide whether I mattered. Coming home felt almost stranger than the desert. The quiet of my small apartment, the hum of the refrigerator at night, the creak of pipes in the walls, all of it felt louder than gunfire because there was nothing to drown it out. I split my days between college classes, paid for with the GI Bill, and long shifts at a bookstore where the smell of paper and coffee grounded me in ways I hadn't expected. One afternoon, sifting through bills and flyers at my mailbox, I saw it, an envelope with handwriting that stopped me cold. Neat, slanted letters, the kind that once scribbled my name on birthday cards. The return address read Rachel Donovan. My sister. 10 years gone, yet suddenly right there in my hands. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the counter, paced the apartment like an animal in a cage, made coffee I didn't drink. Part of me wanted to tear it apart, burn it, scatter the ashes. Another part, smaller, sharper, wanted to know what she dared to say. When I finally unfolded the letter, lavender perfume wafted up. Rachel wrote about regret, about searching, about missing me every holiday. She called leaving me a mistake. That word cracked something deep. A mistake was spilling milk, forgetting homework, not abandoning your sister at a train station. My jaw locked so hard it hurt. I shoved the letter in a drawer, but it haunted me. And then the calls began. One night, my phone lit up 37 times with her name. Her voicemails bled through the speaker. Hazel, please! I need to explain. I'm sorry. I just need you to hear the truth. That word again, truth. It clawed at me worse than the apologies. Because truth had been absent the moment she walked away. Sleep fractured. In class, my notes blurred into her name. At drill weekends, I cleaned my rifle with more force than needed, her voice looping in my head. I tried to bury it, but the calls made one thing clear. Rachel wasn't going to vanish this time. And if she wanted to be heard, I'd have to decide whether I was ready to listen. I finally answered her on a Sunday morning. My voice was ice when I said, "You've got 5 minutes. Make it count." The silence stretched so long, I almost hung up before she blurted out, "I'm sorry. I never meant that day to be the end." Her words tumbled, shaky and uneven. She admitted she thought it was a prank, that she wanted to scare me a little, prove she didn't need to babysit every second. Then she panicked, lied to our parents, and kept lying until the truth buried itself under excuses. Listening to her, I felt the same sickness I'd felt reading her letter. She tried to shrink 10 years of abandonment into a story about fear and poor judgment. But she didn't stop. Her voice cracked when she said she had searched, begged the police, prayed every night. She insisted the guilt consumed her, that she had never forgiven herself. Her sobs came through the speaker like static. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt steady, solid, sharper than her words. "You don't get points for feeling bad," I said. "You don't erase 10 years with a phone call." When she begged to see me face to face, something inside me hardened. I agreed to one meeting, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted to look her in the eye and know exactly how little power she still had over me. The cafe I chose smelled of scorched espresso and cinnamon rolls past their prime. Neutral ground. I arrived early, black coffee cooling untouched in front of me. My boots tapped against the tile, steady as a drumbeat. When Rachel walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The swagger was gone. Her hair was streaked with gray, her shoulders slumped. She froze when she saw me, whispering, "Hazel!" I didn't stand. I didn't smile. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the chair. She slid in, hands twisting in her lap. "Finally," she breathed, eyes wet. "You look strong." "I am," My voice cut clean, steady. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about reckoning. She tried to fill the silence with apologies, piling words between us like sandbags against a flood. I let her speak until the noise turned hollow. When she reached for my wrist, whispering, "I love you," I pulled back and met her eyes without blinking. "That's your burden, not mine," I said. My chair scraped against the tile as I stood. The bell over the cafe door jingled when I walked out, the sound too cheerful for the weight it carried. Each step down Maple Avenue felt heavy at first, but the farther I went, the lighter my chest became. That night, I opened the drawer where her letter had sat, folded and frayed. I read it one last time, not searching for sincerity, only to prove to myself that I owed her nothing. Then I slid it back, shut the drawer hard, and blocked her number. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like reclaiming the steering wheel of my own life. At drill the next weekend, I stood in formation as the commander pinned a commendation to my chest. My squad's applause rang louder than any apology Rachel could ever offer. These were the people who never left me behind, the family I had built from discipline and loyalty. For years I thought closure meant hearing her out, waiting for an explanation. But closure was mine to claim. Not her words, not her regret, mine. The real revenge wasn't hate. It was peace. And peace was finally mine. My name is Lillian Crawford, and the morning my life split down, the middle began with the zipper of a suitcase. When I turned, David was shoveling shirts into a hard-shell case, jaw set, eyes somewhere past me. "Say something," I managed. He didn't. He snapped the case shut, brushed my shoulder, and walked down the hall without touching the walls, like he was afraid the house would claim him back. I followed him to the kitchen on bare feet that felt borrowed. The coffee was dripping. The calendar said tuition planning meeting, Friday. Normal life clung to the room like steam. He reached for his keys. "I'll figure things out," he said, and the front door closed with a click that hurt more than any slam. I opened the laptop on the island because denial needs numbers. Joint checking, $243. Savings, 0. College fund, 0. My mouth went dry. The screen doubled, then steadied. Transactions lined up. Wires moved 3 days ago while I was shelving biographies at the library, each one a clean incision. "Mom!" Clara's voice came from behind me, soft, careful, like stepping around glass. She had her backpack on. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense tie that made her look older in the worst way. "He took it," I said, though the computer had already told her. She looked at the numbers, then at me. No tears, no anger, just the sober look of someone measuring a fire. She reached for a glass, filled it at the sink, and set it down without drinking. "Mom," she said, and something steadied inside her voice. "Don't worry. I handled it." The refrigerator hummed. A car started down the block. I stared at my daughter and realized the house had not gone silent. It had merely changed sides. The silence that followed her words was heavier than anything David had left behind. I wanted to demand an explanation from Clara, to shake her shoulders and remind her she was 12. But all I could do was sit there with my fingers still on the laptop keys, trembling. She slung her backpack higher on her shoulder and kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. "I'll miss the bus if I don't go," she murmured. And before I could form a reply, the door shut softly behind her. I stayed in the kitchen long after, watching the coffee drip into a pot I no longer wanted. The mug David used every morning was still in the dishwasher. His coat still hung by the door. Our life, so ordinary yesterday, had been stripped in less than half an hour. I told myself I should call someone, my sister in Boston. Maybe, or one of the women from the book club, but shame clamped down harder than grief. How could I admit that my husband had emptied his own daughter's future into another woman's hands? How could I explain that I hadn't seen it coming? By afternoon, I was folding laundry just to keep my hands busy. A dress shirt of David's slipped through my fingers and landed on the floor. I stared at it, thinking about the way he'd brushed past me that morning, like a man evacuating a burning building. After 20 years, that was all I was worth. A shrug and a packed suitcase. When Clara returned from school, she moved through the house like a shadow. She put her shoes neatly by the mat, carried her lunchbox to the sink, washed it out, and placed it upside down to dry. Routine, steady, precise, like she was following a script I didn't recognize. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked as she set her backpack on the chair. She gave me the briefest glance, eyes dark and unreadable. "I'm fine." "Are you?" "I wasn't." But the way she said it, calm, clipped, almost adult, stopped me from telling the truth. That night, when I finally crawled into bed, the house groaned in the winter wind. Somewhere down the hall, I heard the faint, rhythmic tapping of keys, a sound too purposeful to be a game, a sound that made me wonder if Clara's earlier words weren't comfort at all, but a warning. And I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the betrayal I thought was over had only begun. The days that followed felt like living inside a cracked mirror. Everything looked familiar, but every reflection was distorted. At the library, I checked in books, smiled at patrons, and answered questions about overdue fines, all while feeling hollowed out. When a colleague asked if David was still planning to join us for the staff potluck, I forced a laugh and said he was busy with work. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. At home, Clara moved with the precision of a clock. She woke at the same time, packed her lunch, and tidied her room. I kept waiting for the breakdown, the slammed door, the sobs into her pillow. But none came. Instead, I caught her watching me with an expression I couldn't name, like she was assessing damage and calculating what to do next. One evening, while I was chopping onions for soup, Clara sat at the kitchen table with her math homework. "Is he coming back?" she asked, not looking up. I froze. The knife poised above the cutting board. "I don't think so, baby." She nodded once, like she'd already known, and returned to her equations. I wanted her to cry, to release some fragment of what was inside, but all I got was that steady, unsettling calm. At night, the house magnified its emptiness. David's absence was a missing note in every sound: the creak of the floorboards, the drip of the faucet, the thud of the heating system kicking on. I would lie in bed, listening for Clara's soft breathing through the wall, trying to anchor myself in her presence. But often, I heard something else: the quick, precise tapping of her keyboard. I told myself she was chatting with friends, maybe distracting herself with games. But the rhythm was different. It carried a purpose that unsettled me. Sometimes it lasted until midnight, long after I had given up on sleep. One Saturday morning, I lingered outside her door. The light under the crack was sharp, not the warm glow of cartoons or YouTube videos. She must have sensed me, because the typing stopped. When I knocked, she called out brightly, "Almost done with my project." Her voice was cheerful, but too rehearsed. I stepped away, carrying the strange weight of suspicion I didn't want to name. I had lost my husband. I couldn't bear the thought that I might be losing my daughter too, to something I didn't yet understand. Sunday evening, I decided to make Clara's favorite: grilled cheese with tomato soup. I wanted something normal, something to remind us both that life still held pieces we could hold on to. I carried the tray to her room and knocked. "Come in," she said, and I stepped into a space that felt too carefully arranged. Her textbooks were spread on the desk, a highlighter poised across one page, but the laptop screen was tilted just enough to shield it from me. When she noticed my eyes drift, she closed it with a practiced flick. "Thanks, Mom." She took the tray without meeting my gaze. I set it down, lingered a moment too long, then asked, "Homework." "History report," she answered, smooth as glass. I smiled tightly, kissed the crown of her head, and left, but unease curled in my stomach. That night, the typing started again. Steady, relentless, like someone drilling through silence. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing that Clara was no longer just escaping into distractions. She was building something. By midweek, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Folding laundry in her room, I noticed a sheet of paper half tucked under a textbook. It was an email printout, and the names at the top made my breath catch. David and Angela Brooks. Words leapt at me. Hotel reservations, transfers, handling Lillian. Mom! Clara's voice came from the doorway. She set down her empty juice glass, her gaze sharp and steady. No panic at being caught. Only watchfulness. Where did you get this? I asked, my voice frayed. She stepped inside, shut the door softly behind her. Dad isn't good with passwords. The room seemed to tilt. My child's voice, calm and certain, laid out truths that made my skin prickle. How long have you known? 6 weeks. She spoke as though it were obvious. The air thickened. While I'd been sleepwalking through my routines, my daughter had been carrying secrets big enough to break a family in half. Her expression didn't waver. Mom, he stole my future. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I realized then that Clara's strange calm wasn't denial. It was strategy. I sat down hard on her bed, clutching the paper like it might burn me. Clara walked closer, her small frame steady, her eyes unblinking. You're 12, I whispered. This isn't your job. This isn't even possible. She shook her head. It became my job the moment he touched my college fund. She crossed the room, reached beneath her mattress, and pulled out a spiral notebook thicker than any school assignment. When she handed it to me, the weight was more than paper. I flipped it open and saw page after page of notes. Dates, transfers, account numbers, even screenshots taped neatly beside her handwriting. Clara, what is this? My voice trembled. Evidence, she said simply. Dad thinks he's clever, but he reuses passwords. He leaves his browser history open. He hides nothing from someone who knows where to look. I turned a page and felt the floor slip beneath me. Bank accounts with my name I'd never opened. Loan applications filed under Clara's social security number. Mortgage paperwork with forged signatures, my signature. My throat tightened. He was going to buy a house. In Florida. Clara nodded. With Angela. They used my college fund as a down payment and planned to disappear. The loans would be in our names. We'd be stuck with the debt. I pressed the heel of my palm to my forehead, fighting nausea. How do you know all this? YouTube tutorials. Security forums. People post more than you'd think. And Angela, she's worse than Dad. She's been stealing from her clients at work. I traced the transfers. You hacked her. Clara's expression was cold, almost adult. She used her last name and graduation year for everything. It wasn't hacking. It was typing. The matter-of-fact tone chilled me more than the content. She was unraveling crimes with the same detachment she might use to solve a math problem. I closed the notebook with shaking hands. Clara, this is dangerous. She met my eyes. More dangerous than letting them ruin us. Her calm was terrifying. My daughter wasn't asking permission. She was leading a war I hadn't even realized we were in. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon while I was rinsing dishes. The caller ID made my stomach lurch, David. My hands were still wet when I answered. Lillian! His voice cracked, sharp with panic. Something's happening. My accounts are frozen, every one of them. And Angela, she got fired. They escorted her out of the office yesterday. Do you know anything about this? I gripped the counter, glancing toward the kitchen table where Clara sat with her laptop open. She didn't look up, but I saw the flicker of windows changing across her screen, the quiet authority in her posture. I don't know what you expect me to say, I replied, keeping my tone even. It's too much to be coincidence, David insisted. Rebecca says. He stopped abruptly, breath ragged. Emails are being sent from my account. Lillian, right now, someone's inside my system. They're posting things, real documents, private messages, onto my company server. A soft chime echoed through the line, perfectly timed with a keystroke Clara made. My chest tightened. Maybe you should call your bank, I said. I already did. They think it's whistleblowing, not harassment, because the documents are real. Lillian, this could ruin me. Did you hire someone? A private investigator. A hacker. Across the room, Clara finally lifted her gaze, meeting mine. She gave the faintest shake of her head, then returned to her screen. I didn't hire anyone, I said truthfully. His voice dropped, urgent, desperate. Then who's doing this? Clara stood, crossed the floor with deliberate calm, and extended her hand. Without hesitation, I placed the phone in her palm. Hi, Dad, she said, her tone light, conversational. The silence on his end stretched before collapsing into a hoarse plea. Clara? Thank God! Someone's trying to make me look like a criminal. You have to tell your mother. Her voice cut him clean. You stole my college fund, Dad. You forged loans in my name. And you thought you'd leave us to carry the debt. His breath faltered. How could you possibly? I know everything, she said evenly. And now you get to live with it. When Clara ended the call, the silence in the kitchen was unbearable. She set the phone on the counter, like it was nothing more than a used napkin, and walked back to her chair. My legs felt weak. I had to grip the back of a chair to steady myself. My daughter had just dismantled her father, with the same ease she used to complete a homework assignment. That night, I lay awake replaying her words, the way her tone never cracked. Pride tangled with fear inside me. I was proud she had protected us, yet terrified of the cost. No child should carry that kind of weight, and yet Clara wore it like armor. By the end of the week, I took her to see Dr. Avery, a child psychologist our pediatrician recommended. The waiting room was painted in soft blues with children's artwork on the walls, but Clara sat with the posture of someone attending a board meeting. When Dr. Avery asked about what had happened, Clara explained it like a school report. She had found the evidence, documented it, and taken steps to stop her father. And how did that make you feel? The doctor asked gently. Clara didn't hesitate. Satisfied. He stole from me. I made sure there were consequences. I flinched at her bluntness, but Dr. Avery only nodded thoughtfully. Later, in private, she told me Clara's response wasn't abnormal. Gifted children often intellectualize emotions, she explained. She's processing betrayal through control. It may look cold, but it's her way of surviving. Back home, Clara worked at the kitchen table on her laptop. But when I peeked over her shoulder, it wasn't surveillance anymore. It was a Word document titled Family Financial Safety, a guide for kids and parents. She was turning our disaster into instructions for others. Password safety, spotting forged documents, reporting fraud. Why are you writing this? I asked. She looked up, her expression steady. Because we weren't the only ones. If I can help other families, then maybe what Dad did won't just be destruction. For the first time since David left, I felt something like hope rising from the rubble. Spring crept into Vermont slowly, with muddy roads and the faint smell of thawing earth. By then, David was a ghost in town. Rumors swirled about his ruined finances, Angela's embezzlement, and their attempt to start over in Florida that collapsed before it began. I didn't correct anyone's stories. I simply stacked books at the library and carried my own. Clara, on the other hand, was building something. She had taken her guide and polished it until it looked like professional material. One evening, she showed me a slide deck she had been invited to present at school, speaking to other kids about digital safety and protecting family money. I watched her rehearse in the living room, her voice steady, her examples clear, her 12-year-old frame carrying the confidence of someone twice her age. Are you nervous? I asked. She shrugged. Maybe a little. But mostly, I want people to understand how easy it is for someone you trust to take advantage. If they know what to look for, maybe they won't get blindsided like we did. Weeks later, her presentation caught the attention of a local reporter covering the Angela Brooks case. Suddenly, the same girl who had been quietly typing late into the night was being asked to share her insights at PTA meetings and youth groups. No one knew the depth of what she'd done to her father. To the outside world, Clara was simply a bright kid passionate about cyber safety. At home, I saw more. She kept spreadsheets of our reduced budget, tracked bills, even clipped articles about fraud prevention. She wasn't just surviving. She was shaping a future from the ashes of betrayal. One night as I tucked her in, she asked, "Do you think Dad regrets it?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe regret isn't the same as understanding." Clara hugged her stuffed rabbit, the one remnant of her childhood softness. "Then I don't need his regret. I just need to make sure no one else gets hurt like we did." In that moment, I realized David's betrayal hadn't shattered her. It had transformed her into something unbreakable, and I would spend the rest of my life trying to catch up to the strength my daughter already carried. Looking back now, I see the night David walked out not as the end of our family, but as the brutal beginning of a new one. The woman I was, dependent on routines, trusting that loyalty meant permanence, was stripped bare in a single morning. And the daughter I thought I knew revealed herself to be someone extraordinary, someone forged in fire I never meant her to face. There are moments when I still ache with shame. I should have been the one to protect her, to shield her from betrayal and debt, and the cruel awakening of knowing a parent's love can fracture. Instead, Clara became the protector, the strategist, the quiet warrior who stood guard while I staggered. Yet I also know this: she didn't just fight for us. She took the wreckage her father left and turned it into a lantern for others. Families now read her guides, learn her lessons, and avoid the traps that once ensnared us. Out of our darkest season, she built something that shines beyond our walls. David may have stolen money, time, and trust, but he never stole Clara's future. She claimed it back, piece by piece, and in doing so taught me the hardest truth of all. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives in the steady hands of a 12-year-old girl who refuses to be broken.